What I'm working on today is gluing fingerboards on. Joinery is one of the most important aspects of guitar construction, in my opinion, and the fingerboard to neck joint is no exception. In fact, it's one of the primary joints, and it's very important to have it perfect. To that end, I like to make sure that this neck face is completely flat in this direction and completely flat in that direction. So I spend a little time truing that up using straight edges and light from this fluorescent tube, so it's within fractions of a thousandth of an inch in both directions, completely true, and the surface is scraped clean, so it's the perfect surface for making a good glue joint. Now you may notice that this neck has been partially carved. That's an important stage as well. I don't like to just glue the fingerboard onto a square neck, because every time you remove wood from a piece of wood, it has a tendency to move. So I like to get a good proportion of the neck carving done first and allow that little bit of stress, such as there may be, to relieve, and I leave that to sit for a few days. Once that's done, then I move on to truing this face. That's one of the important aspects of making sure the neck is stable when you've completed it, and it's part of the guitar, because what you really don't want is the neck to be able to move under its own steam. You want the neck to go where you want it to go. So that's a very important stage. The second thing I do before truing that up is I put a little bit of tension on the truss rod just to introduce a little bit of back bow. Then I take that back bow out and true it up, because what that does is allows for, it's the first stage of introducing a little bit of static relief into the neck to allow a single action truss rod to work in both directions. It also helps to counteract the natural tendency for the neck to back bow slightly when you glue this on. If you just glue it on straight like that with any water-based glue, there is a tendency for that to not remain straight and back bow slightly. So having that little bit of static relief built in allows you to counteract that if it should happen. So I've completed this now. This one's done. I'm working on two at the moment. The other neck is done. I've just got the last thing I have to do before gluing them up is to true this fingerboard up, which I do with a piece of, it's true anyway because it's been through the planer and through the sander, but just a final check. I have some sticky black 120 grit paper on my surface table, and I just run that over like that, and sight it up and see where it's contacted. I can see that it's close to perfect. Now, just to prepare that surface for gluing, I get a scraper. Now I know that surface is straight. I've trued that surface up so it's completely straight, so I can quite confidently clean that up. 2 strokes of the scraper just to take off the fuzziness from the sandpaper. And a couple that way. And now I'm completely confident that both surfaces, the surface of the neck and the surface of the fingerboard, are perfectly flat and will meet together perfectly. There'll be no glue voids or anything underneath. That is, for me, a vitally important part of the guitar construction. So I'll do a little bit of a reset and we'll be ready to get some glue on it. Now we're nearly ready to glue up. There's a couple of little things to point out. The fingerboard is located onto the neck with 4 1.5mm diameter stainless steel pins, which you might be able to see there. They're drilled in line with the fret slots, so they're covered over by the tang of the, not the tang, covered over by the crown of the fret once they're installed. And both the holes in the fingerboard and the holes in the neck are all drilled off the same jig, so they're guaranteed to line up. And before I apply the glue to the face of the neck, I tape over the holes in the neck and also over the truss rod hole, just to avoid any glue going down the hole, stopping the pins going in, and too much glue going down around the truss rod. So I do that first. I also tape over the back of the neck with some cork and a piece of wood on the back there, just to protect the surface. Now, most of that surface gets carved away anyway. Well, all of it gets carved away, but I still prefer not to leave big clamp marks in it if I can help it. So with the airline, I've blown all the dust off of this face and all the dust off of this face, so we're almost ready to go. What will happen is I'll apply glue to both surfaces. This will go on there. I use this birch ply caul over the top, which has holes in which locate over the dowel pins, and then apply the clamps. To avoid too much messing around, I've pre-set up all the clamps, so the clamps are in order of where they're going to go, and they're all set to the right dimension, so they'll go on cleanly without too much mucking around. So without further ado, I'll get gluing. And that is that. Apart from, before we make a horrible mess, rather than leave a horrible mess I should say, we'll clean up all the glue that's squeezed out. So I'll grab a little bit of warm water and a rag, and we'll get that done and move on to the next one. And essentially, that's it. The board's exactly where I want it. Both faces fitting perfectly, exactly lined up. It hasn't slipped or slid. Stress and drama free. Perfect. Right, On to the next one. It's now 5 o'clock in the evening, and I'll unclamp this at some point tomorrow. I could unclamp it first thing tomorrow. You know, the glue will have set in about, you know, a couple of hours. Certainly enough that it will be stuck and won't come undone. But I like to leave them clamped up with the caul overnight at least, so I'm happy to unclamp it tomorrow morning. But I won't do anything to it for several days. It will sit, and again, like after most processes, it sits for a few days to allow any sort of stresses to develop or relieve or what have you. So I won't just dive straight into net carving, which is the next stage. The next stage will be net carving, well, what I call 90% net carving. I carve the neck to slightly oversize of what it's finally going to be, and at that point, that's another stage of wood removal. So I then let it sit for a couple of days, and then, and only then, do I radius the fingerboard, because at that point I know that the neck is pretty much where it's going to be at its final dimensions. I radius the fingerboard, then once the fingerboard is radiused and trued up and where I want it, I do the final bit of neck shaping, which is really little more than sanding, really, just to bring it to the final dimension so it's exactly where I want it to be. And that's that.